I'd like to start with some just kind of broad observations and thoughts that you might have on the institution of marriage itself, because I grew up around a lot of radical, anti-establishment people, and it seems like a generation before ours, there was a lot of, that marriage is just, I think someone said once, a relationship recognized by the police, and and now it seems that everybody wants to get married, and regardless of where you stand politically, regardless how progressive your ideas are in other ways.
I think that's because everyone has sort of collectively realized that this old oppressive patriarchal definition of marriage that people used to think that, oh, I'm not going to buy into that, I don't want to support that, is optional and is not what marriage has to be. It hasn't been what marriage is required to be for all for decades and decades. Marriage is as oppressive an institution as an individual couple opts to make it. Other than that, marriage is whatever any other individual couple wants to make it. These people who say that marriage is inherently sexist, dehumanizing, about women as property, and yeah, it was that for a very long time. And straight people, including a lot of the straight people who accuse gay people of wanting to redefine the institution of marriage, they redefined the institution of marriage 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago to be the legal union of two autonomous and equal individuals, period. The end. Everything else about that marriage is up to that couple that got married. It can be for life or not, it can be monogamous or not, they can have kids or not, it can be a church service or not. Everything is optional. We only hear that marriage is defined by marriage, by children, we only hear that marriage is defined by children, by monogamy, and by religion when gay people want to get married. Straight people don't require that of each other anymore.
And what happened? I mean, why? Is it just a flexible enough institution that we could just like reinvent it this way, or how do you think that happened? That the institution was able to go from this oppressive thing to something that is so, ideally what you described.
Egalitarian.
Yeah.
Or as egalitarian as any individual couple wants to make it.
Right.
A lot of straight couples will default into bullshit gendered sex roles, but even that's opt-in. Even you're thoughtlessly doing it. That's a choice that you made unconsciously. How did it happen? I don't know. It's almost as if, for centuries, for millennia, marriage was this property transaction. One man gifted his daughter his property to another man, and she became his wife, also his property in that transaction. And that began to shift less than 100 years ago. It really did begin to shift, and I'm not making any sense. And I think. When we first began to define marriage as imposing equal rights and responsibilities on both partners in a couple, rather than extend to women the same freedom that men had always historically enjoyed in marriage. Monogamy wasn't for men. Men were not monogamous. Women were monogamous. The reason we had to control women as property was to alleviate the man's anxiety about paternity. If you didn't have absolute control of your wife, you might not be raising your own kids, right? You had to have sort of really kind of a terror government over your wife to like make sure that she was only fucking you. You could have mistresses, you could have concubines, you could see prostitutes. She was much more limited. And I think that that's part of what's begun to shift, is this idea that rather than, in the last 10, 20 years, 30 years, this sort of subconscious awareness that we have to make marriage as freeing for men and women as it always historically was for men. Because the mistake I think we made in like the 50s and 40s and 60s was instead of giving women the same freedom that men had always enjoyed, we imposed on men the same limitations and restrictions that women had always endured. And that's been a disaster for marriage. We put sex at the heart of marriage. We put sexual exclusivity, successfully executed monogamous behavior over 60 fucking years. We said that is the only definition of marriage that applies. That is the acid test of marriage. Has your dick touched anybody else? Has your pussy touched anybody else? Okay, good. You have a rock solid marriage. If your dick touched somebody else, your pussy touched somebody else, you failed at the marriage thing because you weren't monogamous.
And is that just a coincidence that happened, or is there something intrinsically, about sex and monogamy that makes it suited to this sort of pairing?
No, there's nothing that makes it suited toward that sort of pairing. I love Stephanie Kuntz's book, Marriage: A History, How Love Conquered Marriage, and I love to point out sometimes to social conservatives that the social conservative position on love and marriage was you don't mix those two things because love is unstable and sexual desire is unstable. And if that's the foundation on which you build a marriage, the marriage is going to collapse.
Very good. You've like led into 3 of my questions at once, but it's perfect. So as I was telling you before, you know, we started, the impetus for this film was I got divorced after nearly 10 years with somebody, and
Despite the fact that you've been reading my column all those years?
yes.
So you blame me.
No, I don't blame you at all. On the contrary, I come to you for advice all the time in my head, and it's always very helpful reading your column. And in fact, if you'll humor me, I wrote a couple of letters to
Okay.
you that, imagining during the different stages of my marriage and divorce that I would have liked to have asked you maybe and see how you would react. And, you know, I don't have children, so I know that already makes my situation 10 times easier than what most people have to go through. And we didn't have a protracted, crazy legal battle. I mean, so my divorce is probably easier than 95% of divorces, and yet it was the most traumatic experience of my life, probably, maybe equaling the death of my father, or, you know, it was just very difficult. And so the fact that mine was easier actually doesn't give me any solace. It makes me think this is a really important issue. Like, there's, you know,
And
all
if
the
it
stuff
was-
you talk about, it's real. The pain that people feel and the trauma that it causes, and so that's what led me to believe that this is actually something worth pursuing in a film and thinking about, and, you know, being grateful for everything you write about. So these are short, but imagine you got this letter in your inbox in 2002. Dear Dan, I'm pretty sure I'm about to do something completely irrational. I'm a 26-year-old straight male. 5 months ago, I met this incredible woman, beautiful, smart, funny, and very mature, even though she's only 18. We're talking about getting married in secret in the back of a school bus. Why a school bus? Because I've been living in one for the past year that I use as a mobile film studio. When I think about it logically, it doesn't make any sense, but we're madly in love and we have this inexplicable desire to become a family. And it seems so romantic to commit our lives to each other in this spontaneous way. I know she seems young, but my mom was only 18 when she had me, and my father was 50. And they never got married, but they stayed together for 10 years, and my brother and I are the result of that union. What do you think? Are we crazy to get married? We found someone online who can come marry us right away.
Oh my God.
And we're planning on not telling anyone about it.
Even better.
Is there any hope that we can have a happy, enduring, and monogamous and successful marriage? And as a gay man, hearing people go on about the sanctity of marriage, does a question like this rub you the wrong way? I guess what I'm getting at is, should we follow our hearts or our heads when it comes to getting married?
I don't know where to start. You know, that desire, that impulse, you know, to be so overwhelmed by love that you want to permanently somehow enshrine that momentary feeling by codifying it through marriage, is evidence all by itself that you shouldn't get married, that you're not mature enough for marriage, that you're not ready. Impulsive marriages are an indictment of the people entering into them. They're the only proof that you need that these people aren't ready for marriage and the marriage isn't going to last. The impulsivity of it.
Right.
So, and you have so much working against you, that you're both so young, that she's 18 and so mature, but not mature enough to realize that this is a disaster. Right? You know, all the stats show that the younger people are when they marry, the likelier they are to divorce. I'm not of the opinion that every divorce is a disaster. I think that two people can survive a marriage and you can still count that marriage a success. That two people can come together, they can be married for a certain amount of time, they can have kids or not. If, you know, measured by the parting, is it an amicable parting? Are they able, after that, you know, the pain of tearing apart, to like have some sort of friendship, some sort of contact, appreciate each other for who they were? Did they learn and grow during that marriage? Can they be friends or friendly after it's all over and the dust is settled? Well, then can't we count that marriage a success? Do we have to say that that was a failed marriage? Because we look at people who are in 60-year marriages with abuse and violence and thrown crockery and drinking and who make each other miserable for 60 years. But if one of them dies while they're still married, that's a successful marriage. Whereas if two people are together for 5, 10, 15 years, part amicably or friends, that's a failed marriage. I think that's a successful marriage. And that's a failure. But, you know, if you're going to measure success by, are we going to be together for the rest of our lives? Are we going to be able to preserve forever this feeling of 26 and 18 by getting married? No, you're not.
Very good.
You've written the death warrant. You signed the death warrant for your marriage. Particularly if what you think you're going to somehow protect forever is its desire only to fuck each other. That feeling when you're 26 and 18 or 18, 18 or 28 and 28, when you've just met and you really have eyes for no one else, that this person is everything you want sexually, that goes away. And if that is the reason you married, then the reason you married goes away. And then what to do with the marriage? Marriage does not protect the monogamous impulse.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
You will want to fuck other people when you are married.
So
if you define love and that desire to marry as I do not want to fuck other people, what does it mean for your marriage when you do want to fuck other people, when it comes back? That desire for strange, for some other person's sexual attention. If your definition of marriage is to, you know, protect forever that desire just to be with this one person, if you define marriage purely in sexual terms, your marriage will not last.
And fortunately, we didn't do that. And by, you know, against all odds, it actually ended up working for a long time. And so I'm going to
next question.
Go on to the next question. And it's not all letters. I only have 5 letters for our interview, but I'm going to lead right into this one for now. Well, yeah.
Lean to your right a bit when Dan is responding, okay?
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Alan, are you happy? Everybody else happy? So, well, we did it, despite what you said.
Okay.
I knew you'd say no. And despite the impossible odds, it seems to have been a great decision. When her family found out, believe it or not, they were thrilled. I think what they said, given the seeming inevitability of the war that's coming in Iraq, it was an optimistic thing to do in pessimistic times. They've taken me in almost like a son, and I think in a lot of ways I was longing for that. My own background, while colorful, was anything but stable. To give you a little background, and this is going to be a very fast autobiography here. In the 1950s, my grandfather Billy married my grandmother Marge. They had 2 children, my Aunt Karen in 1955 and my mother Deborah in 1957. They lived in a nuclear family model for a few years until my grandfather ran off to Italy, where he became a spaghetti western star.
Oh my God.
While there, he started a commune in which free love was practiced and societal structures of all kinds were rejected. When she was 15, my mother, Deborah, dropped out of high school and went to Italy to find her father. They got along very well, and she stayed there. And when she was 16, she met my father, who was a 47-year-old Italian prince named Tao Ruspoli. And Tao was a very well-known playboy in the 1950s and 60s and was still married to his second wife when he met my mother. My father and his wife had a son, and his wife and son lived upstairs from my mother and father. When my mother was 17, I was conceived, and they went to Thailand, where I was born in 1975.
Holy shit.
There's a newspaper headline that I still have, which proclaims, "Here's Prince Tao Ruspoli with his wife, his son, and his lover, who's pregnant." And then 3 years later, they had my little brother, Bartolomeo. Meanwhile, my grandfather Billy had 3 more children with 3 different women around the same time. And then when my father was 70, he married for the 4th time and had 2 more children, Melusine when he was 70 and Theodore when he was 73.
Oh my God.
My parents had separated years earlier when I was 8, and my mother took me and my little brother to Los Angeles, where she raised us as a single mother. We did get to spend our holidays in Italy with our father in the family castle outside of Rome. And this kind of goes back to my question earlier, which is this kind of 60s mentality that I was raised very surrounded by didn't provide a lot of security. And my grandfather Billy's 3 sons that are my age all have opted for very kind of straight lives. You know, they've gotten married, and one of their mothers just appalled, saying that, I can't believe my son became so bourgeois after all the efforts we made to destroy all of that. And I'm wondering if part of the kind of reaffirmation of marriage comes from
The
this
chaos of the 60s and this
Yes.
free love horse shit.
Yeah, exactly.
You said something before when we first started talking about your marriage and divorce, and that there were no children. You didn't have any children with your wife, and that made it simpler. And it does. And I'm actually sometimes accused of being conservative, because the first question I ask somebody when they say, we've been together a certain amount of time, we're thinking about getting divorced, the first thing out of my mouth is, do you have kids? Because it does change the advice that you give, because I don't think that adults have a right to just careen around traumatizing children. I think children have a right, and maybe traumatizing is too strong a word, but kids have this desire for, this need for some constancy from the adults in their lives, which is not just stability or structure or framework. It's that your parents aren't constantly reinventing themselves. You know who your parents are, and they're going to be who they are for at least a significant chunk of your childhood. And then, then when you're done, they can go reinvent themselves if they want. And I have a problem with people who are always sort of, you can't take off for India when you have an 8-year-old and just decide you're going to go learn yoga in the woods, and your kid has to just sort of be dragged along in your wake like some junk behind a comet being pulled through space. You have to kind of stay put and stay the same for a while. And I don't know what to, is marriage a response to this free love shit in the 60s? Is this sort of modern, sort of bring the gays in marriage movement? Perhaps it is. Your childhood sounds fascinating. I don't know you personally. I don't know how much, it doesn't sound like you're wrecked by it. You have a life and a career, and you have friends, and they're all in the kitchen. And it seems like you're not, you probably had a really colorful life experience. I wouldn't trade yours for mine, though. Even though my parents divorced when I was a teenager, but for the first, 15, 16 years of my life, everything stayed the same one day to the next. And I found that, I think that is important. And I don't think people should have kids who can't hew to that for a while.
Excuse me. Yeah, and as part of our research, jumping ahead in the story a little bit, we, my girlfriend and I went to a free love commune in Portugal. And I can see why you're rolling your eyes.
Love ain't
and already
free.
Saying, yeah, but I would like...
Sex isn't free. There's costs. There's consequences. There's other people's lives in the balance.
Well, their attitude was like, we can provide stability as a group and as a community for the kids, which is more than this kind of rupture that happens when the divorce happens.
I agree with that. It takes a village. I agree with Hillary. Right? It takes a village. It does. The nuclear family isolated by itself in a ranch house in the suburbs, without elders around, without other, community members involved very intimately in the lives of the children, that is an aberration. And that will pass away. In some ways, maybe these communes recreate the kind of communal village life that was very stabilizing and healthy and good for kids. But it's this sort of merry-go-round of commitments, not multiple partners, but splitting off and recommitting and splitting off and recommitting. I was thinking of this interview the Duchess of Devonshire gave to the New York Times in a Saturday Profile a few years ago, where the Duke, one of the Milford sisters from the 20s and 30s, and she married the Duke of Devonshire, and he, eventually died, and so now she's the Dowager Duchess of Devonshire. And he was a famous philanderer in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they said, why didn't you ever divorce him? She's like, divorce is so boring. And that's my feeling. Like, divorce is boring. Yeah, he fucked around. Who gives a shit?
Right. And do you think, though, that there's anything that we can learn from these kind of free love experiments, or what happened in the 60s? Is there something that we who have bounced back a little bit and reaffirmed a certain stability, are there lessons from that? Because I still see the kind of conservative progressive fight as a kind of idealized version of the 50s and an idealized version of the 60s.
I think the question is,
together.
Can you have marriage and freedom too? Because when we define marriage as the death of fun, the death of adventure, the end of freedom, then what's the incentive to get married? And there's a huge incentive to get unmarried if you are married. If the only way you can have a new experience, you can have sex with somebody else, you can have an adventure, is to get rid of your spouse. Our desire for novelty and new experiences is so strong, we will get rid of our spouses if that is the only way. So perhaps what we're seeing in the current debates over non-monogamy and polyamory is this desire to take some of the free lovey shit that people want, that freedom to maneuver, and this structure and stability that people also want, and see if we can't marry these two things together and say you can have commitment and you can have an adventure every once in a while too. That you can have your immediate next of kin, you can have your spouse, you can have that one person who does for you, that you do for, that one person in the world who is your immediate next of kin, and that person's existence in your life and what they bring to your life doesn't preclude novelty, other experiences, other people, other relationships, other loves.
And you say in your book that, gay men seem to have figured this out, and maybe we can learn something from that, that straight people can. Is it...
Gay men have figured it out better than the free love heterosexual fuckathon that was the 50s, the 60s, 70s.
And for background, do you think that gay men have it figured out because you have two people that are kind of genetically and hormonally similar, or is it because men haven't had the thousands of years of oppression behind them? I mean, is there something biologically different between men and women that allows it to be easier for two men to be together and work these things out in a way that is congruent? Or should straight people look to you for an example of what happens if you get rid of all those thousands of years of problems?
Yeah, you have stability and
right?
fun.
Am I phrasing that right?
The advantage that gay people have over straight people in relationships is that we have to communicate with each other in a way that straight couples don't. Some straight couples do, but too many straight couples default not to. We also are not shackled by gender roles. We can't default to gender roles. Big story in the New York Times today, I just read it on the plane on the way here, about how men still aren't doing any of the housework. No more of the housework than they were doing 30, 40 years ago are they doing now. And I just kind of laughed reading that. It was one of those moments where I go, ha, glad I'm gay. Like, the dishes get done, the laundry gets done, the bathrooms get cleaned at our house, and it's not because one of us grows vagina once a week and runs around cleaning. It's because we can't default to these gender roles as thoughtlessly. But with the advantages the gay couples have that I really think plays out when you look at the research on relationship satisfaction among long-term partnered gay couples is that we have to communicate, we have to talk. And it's built into our sex lives in a way that then spills over into our relationships. Everything has to be negotiated. When a man and a woman go to bed together, they get to consent. Yes, we're going to have sex. And then they stop talking and they start fucking, because sex is my penis in your vagina. Period. The end. Two dudes go to bed together and then they start talking, because they can't just default to penis and vagina intercourse because there ain't no vaginas. And there are two buttholes, and then you still have to talk about that. And you have to talk it all out. You have to negotiate it. You have to hash it out. And I think that creates a setting in a gay relationship for kind of radical honesty in a way, because you're negotiating what you want sexually, and then that spills over into what you want in a relationship and what the expectations are. And you're both men, and you have a certain realism about the way men are. You're not naive. You haven't succumbed to the rom-com never-ending bullshit-a-thon that so many women are exposed to, that posits that there's like a guy out there who's unlike every other guy out there, who's different than all those other guys who've been shitty to you or cheated or looked at porn, God forbid, when they could have been fucking you instead or whatever. There's that one guy out there who's beautiful and handsome and perfect and doesn't look at porn and only has eyes for you and wants marriage and wants kids and blah, blah, blah. We don't arrive in our relationships expecting that we've found that rom-com bullshit straight guy, because we know that guy doesn't exist because we're guys.
And do you think there's a biological difference though between the sex drives of men and women and the way that we act on that, or do you think that's culturally conditioned?
There's a debate, right? Sometimes straight people look at the way gay people behave, straight men, and they go, straight people look at bathhouses, anonymous sex, the ease with which gay people can hook up. And they think, oh my God, what is up with gay men? And it's not that we're gay men, that some of us, not all of us, behave that way. It's that we're men, right? Men are pigs. And if you're a straight guy, it's harder to just get sex because women are less likely to want to have sex. A whorehouse is a bathhouse staffed by volunteers. There is no parallel in hetero land, right? Because of the commodification of sex, because of a supply and demand problem in straight land. And where does that come from? There are arguments that it's been selected for evolutionarily, that women who weren't sort of indiscriminate were likely to survive and pass their genes on, and so there's this evolutionary pressure. But culturally, there's also all this pressure on women. How do you separate those things? I think it's kind of a combo platter. I think women are, the consequences of sex fall much more disproportionately onto the shoulders of women. He's not going to get pregnant and be stuck with a kid. Sexually transmitted diseases pass more easily from male to female than female to male. Intimate partner violence, rape, domestic violence, all of these consequences fall hugely disproportionately onto women's shoulders. Of course it's going to make women less likely to just jump in and be sexual. I think women are as filled with desire as anyone else, but we've had 50,000 years of human culture terrorizing and slut-shaming women about their desires, and 50,000 years of men terrorizing women about their desires, and women terrorizing each other. It's not just men who slut-shame women slut-shame each other. Yeah. And so we don't know what female sexuality outside of those cultural restraints would look like, and we have no way to really tease apart what's necessarily biological from what's cultural.
Right.
It's a combo, and it creates a supply and demand problem. That's a huge issue for straight guys. Some of, I think, the anger that some straight men feel for gay men is just jealousy. Because they know we can get our dick sucked pretty much whenever we want if we don't care who's sucking our dick. I care who's sucking my dick, so I don't go to bathhouses and parks in the middle of the night where people do that sort of shit, because I like to know the name of the person in whose mouth my dick resides.
So this is perfect lead-in. We're going to talk about the Catholic Church. So
speaking of dicks and mouths.
So I mentioned that my father was a prince, and the
just
background of
offhandedly,
that.
you just slipped that in.
My family goes back 1,000 years in Rome, and there's a something called the Black aristocracy, which is families that you have to scooch that way.
I will.
Just,
I was just adjusting my ankle.
So there's something called the
Artificial
Black
limb.
aristocracy in Italy, which in Rome specifically, which is about 5 families that basically supported the Pope with military and economic power, and in exchange the Pope handed out titles and feudal lands. And
Awesome, good for you guys.
And in the film, when you see...
You just had to hand over the youngest son in the family to get raped by priests, and then you kept this system
Exactly,
going
and my aunt, my cousin in the family castle tells the story of our poor great aunt with 9 greats fell in love with this guy, and she wanted to marry him, but the father decided that she was too rebellious for marriage and had the guy marry her sister instead, sent her to the convent, where she became this kind of self-flagellating saint. They actually...
canonized her?
Yes, Saint Jacinta is my great aunt. Someone I told that story once said, my how you've fallen. But so I know that you grew up Catholic, and I read with great interest I had no religious upbringing, thank God. My parents kind of did the rebelling before me. But marriage and religion have been very tied closely together, and I can see in a positive way why that is. I think that and I think one of the reasons that I wanted to get married and what was good about our marriage is I think this idea in a world where everything else is commodified and replaceable, the idea of one thing that's sacred and is outside of whatever whims you have at that moment can be very reassuring, and I think that there is this kind of longing for a sense of the sacred. So I think you struggle with this very eloquently in your book. There's a tension between this kind of history and tradition and sense of the sacred that religion provides, and I think that's why it and marriage have been so closely tied together for so many years. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, there's no greater forum of oppression than the church. And so could you just talk a little bit about that, what your feelings are about the relationship between marriage and religion in your...
Well, they were originally unrelated, marriage and religion. But when the whole world became the Catholic Church took over everything, including marriage. Or the whole Western world became the Catholic Church. And it is not a marriage convenience, it is a co-option by the church. The church has inserted itself, religions always insert themselves into human relationships and human sexual expression, because if you can come in between people and their desires, and if you can make their desires their ticket to hell potentially without your intervention, you can control those people forever. That's why religion rushes in to regulate sexual relationships, interpersonal relationships, marital relationships, because you can control people if you seize that ground. But which is not to say that that religion and the pageantry and the symbolism and when my mother died, it was wonderful to have these religious sort of rituals to fall back on because we didn't know what the fuck else to do, and that was beautiful. That was something that religion does provide. Religion can solemnize a moment with with this foo-for-all, and it has a beauty, and the moment can emotionally feel very transcendent. And then if you have these dance steps basically that you can go through that manifest those transcendent feelings, and then tie you to this history in your family going back generations, to be able to say that this thing that I'm doing now, my parents did, my grandparents did, my great-grandparents did, my great-great-grandparents did. This is a part of, to step into that, the flow of generations and those rituals, because you lose track of your family over time, unless your family is royalty, and those sorts of things are kept track of for 1,200 years. I don't know what my great-grandparents were like, or my great-grandparents were like, or what they did. I do know they married, and so did I. And I guess I'm just like running my mouth now. I don't know what I'm.
No. Do you think that marriage still, that there is still a place for? I'm not religious as I know you aren't, but I have my best friend's very religious, and he would rather than reject the church, he would rather fight from within to make it more inclusive, so that these rituals could be maintained. Do you think we can just
we can have the ritual? We can have the rituals without the bullshit. I call myself culturally Catholic, and I feel culturally Catholic, and my friends who are Jewish, they get together, they do Rosh Hashanah, they get together, they do Yom Kippur. They're able to live these rituals, to perform them, without going, I believe there's a Messiah coming at some point, and this and that, and they're not religious people at all, but they can affirm their cultural identity as Jews. And it helps them tap into that feeling of timelessness and those previous generations of their families. And we should learn how to do that as Catholics. We should learn how to do that as everything else, and drop the hocus pocus bullshit.
Yeah, I think Italians have a better sense of this probably in French, and I think that they probably have a lot of the pageantry without the actual beliefs.
Right,
I think there's a Puritanism that
this wafer is literally Jesus Christ's flesh. You believe that? No.
No.
Right?
Nobody does.
Don't. Nobody does. We all have to go, oh yeah, we believe that. Literally, and that is literally, they spent some chemical transubstantiation that turns this crap into the body and blood of Christ, and it really doesn't. And can we have the rituals without the toxicity of the belief and bullshit? And I think we can.
Yeah. And marriage should maybe be one of those.
Because
or no.
Religion is a creation of human culture, and it has a kind of beauty and mystery, and the credit for it goes to humanity,
right? And
not to God, not to imaginary friends.
Right.
We built it, to borrow some 2012 presidential election horseshit. We built that. Humanity created religions as a solace, and then they became a focus of power and control and everything else. But there's actually kind of a beauty at the core of them that is about just ministering to people in that existential terror that is human existence. Like, why and what for, and why suffering, and why are we here, and what the fuck? And religion rushed in to fill that void. We put the gods on top of the mountain when we hadn't been to the top of the mountain, and then we got to the top of the mountain, they weren't there. So we put them in the sky, and then we got to the sky, and they weren't fucking there. They're nowhere, and we can, but with those stories that were created to help us feel better about the night, the bullshit that we made up when we didn't know why the sun kept coming up, we hoped it would. And we make up these bullshit stories to make ourselves feel better in the dark of the night about whether the sun was going to come up tomorrow. And that has a beauty, and that has meaning and value. And we shouldn't discard it, but we shouldn't believe it.
Right. Okay, so we got another short letter here. Dear Dan, I've been married 5 years now, and everything is so good that I'm wondering if I should be worried. I know that sounds funny, but I wonder if being too comfortable can have a negative effect on a relationship. Or the rewards offered by the type of complicity that I have with my wife, which is more like a close friendship now than a passionate love affair, just worth the price of the loss of passion? Is there something I can do or should do to rekindle that passion? I've been reading your column for a long time, and this seems to be a very common issue, but I'm wondering what advice you can offer me.
I sometimes feel really guilty when I feel like a hypocrite sometimes when I talk about this very problem, because somehow I got hit by lightning. Somehow I lucked into a relationship where I feel sexually about my husband the same way I did, if not more intensely than I did the week we first met. I still want to bone the shit out of him all the time, and I still do. That said, the way that you rekindle that spark, that passion, is to recognize what was exciting about the relationship at the outset. What is exciting about not just that particular relationship, but all relationships, are the obstacles that you don't, there's this discovery process where you're learning about each other and you're surprised by things. And there are, hurdles to overcome, particularly when you're young. You may want to fuck this person and not have a place to fuck this person. And you have to scramble to find that place, to find the time. You have to work at getting it. Once you're in a long-term relationship where you can have it whenever you want without a struggle, it's less interesting to have it. Unless you artificially create barriers. You artificially recreate the struggle to fuck this person or to be fucked by this person. And that can be as simple in a long-term relationship as saying, we're going to have sex 3 times this week, which is a lot for people in a long-term relationship, but not in our house, not in our bed, and you have to figure out when and where and surprise me. And then if you can make it that sort of game again, that chase and that pursuit again, it can be exciting again. You have to recreate, every new relationship that's sexual is kind of an adventure, and then the adventure goes away. Then it's just kind of where you live, and it's not an adventure anymore, it's not a surprise anymore. And how can you continue to surprise each other without feeling like you're having to pull rabbits out of a hat all the time? That's the trick. You have to figure that out. Or you have to say, our marriage now isn't about this. That we can stay married and not be sexually to each other who we were at the start. We have to recognize, though, that adult human beings want to feel that kind of sexual passion and that kind of desire. So if we stay married and say our marriage isn't about that, we know we're both going to look for that elsewhere at some point. And so if that's not important, if that's not a defining characteristic of our marriage, then when one of us has that with someone else briefly, that can't be a reason to end our marriage either.
This leads perfectly into my little next question, which is that you go against every other advice columnist in the world probably, and
because I'm the only one with a dick. That's the problem.
Are they all women? I guess more or less they are. And readers are mostly women also, right? So they have to you say in your book that you have to cater to what women want to hear in some way. But but most sex advice columnists do. And so you go against the grain and say that infidelity isn't always a bad thing. And I'm wondering if I'm sure you've answered this 1,000 times, and I'm sorry, but can you kind of spell out the times where you think that people have permission to cheat and when they don't?
The difficulty when you talk about when it's okay to cheat is that everyone pictures sort of an idealized newlywed couple together a couple of years, and then he or she cheats, and of course that's the worst thing you could possibly do. And often the cheating comes later in a marriage. Two people get 20, 25 years. One of them's done with sex. One of them actually does not want to have sex anymore. What is that other person supposed to do? Are they supposed to submit to having their sexual life unilaterally declared dead? Or are they supposed to divorce? What if they can't divorce? What if their partner is dependent on them for health insurance or economically dependent on them? What if they have small children? I look at that situation and go, well, there are 2 options there. You can leave or you can cheat. And sometimes cheating is the least worst option. Sometimes cheating is the lesser evil. Sometimes it's better to stay and cheat. There's a higher loyalty than just I didn't touch anybody else with my dick ever over 50 years. And, if your spouse won't fuck you, isn't interested in sex, their libido has completely tanked and cratered, they've got them checked, it's not depression, it's not a hormone thing, they're just not into sex for whatever reason. What's your responsibility? What's your obligation? What does monogamy mean in that context? How can you be monogamous to someone who won't fuck you? I'm monogamously committed to you. I will not have sex with anyone else. Because that's what we do. We don't have sex. So I will not have sex with other people, which means I will have sex with everybody, but I will just not have sex with you. It gets into this crazy sort of funhouse mirrored world. And I just think there are times when it's better to cheat. I'm not making any sense anymore. There are other times, though.
Absolutely.
There are other scenarios where Say someone has a sexual need that their partner is unwilling to fulfill. And it's really easy if you don't have that stone in your shoe, if you don't have some kink that you turn over and over in your head all the time, this desire that's unmet, to say, oh, well, if you're in love, you would just go without, you would just sacrifice. Yeah, that's easy to say if you're not that person. But you know, say you're into bondage and your wife is not into bondage at all. Can you outsource that? Can you see a professional dominatrix every few months? Don't bankrupt your family or anything. Get that need met discreetly and relieve your wife of that responsibility. I've advised couples in just that situation where once the wife was like, yes, go do it, they were just so relieved that they didn't have to be pestered for it anymore. He was happy because looking at his wife didn't mean I never get to do this, right? If you don't want someone to look at you and think, there's the reason I can't. You want someone to look at you and think, there's the reason anything is possible.
Does that apply only to kinks, or even just what if it's a more subtle just difference in libido? If one person wants it twice a month and the other one wants it twice a day, what do you do in that case?
You don't marry each other.
Right. You think that should be a standard for why you marry someone,
yes.
even if everything else is great?
Yes, even if everything else is great, you do not marry each other if there's a huge libido mismatch. It is a recipe for disaster. Half my male. Everything in our relationship is great, love, 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 wonderful, my best friends spend all the time together. Then the but comes in that question. And the but is always, I am being rejected constantly. It's killing me. My sexual self-esteem is shredded. I want sex once a month, once a week. And he only wants sex once a year.
Wow.
And I just, look, the solution, the only answer is you get in a time machine and you go back before you had kids and you don't marry that person. And you prioritize someone that you're sexually compatible with.
But of course, the culture tells us sex isn't that important,
I know,
right?
no, the culture
and they accuse you of being overly concerned with sex. And me, even in the film so far, people have said, oh, you know, why are you making so much as a big deal about sex? But that's the one thing that we kind of base our monogamous relationships on, right?
The culture says sex is so unimportant that you shouldn't prioritize it in a marriage. But sex is so hugely important that you can't have it with anybody else. Well, if you can't have it with anybody else but your spouse, then you better fucking prioritize it in your marriage.
Right.
These forces are in conflict culturally. We tell people you're a bad person if you think too much about sex. You're a bad person if you look at your partner and reject them because the sex isn't there. And then these people then marry despite the fact that they're sexually incompatible. And then we look at them and say, you're a bad person for fucking somebody else.
And you say in your book that sex advice columnists and everybody else always gives the blame to the person who wants it less. Was that?
Yeah, the person who wants it more is always at fault.
Why is that?
Because sex is evil and sex is bad. Because sex is dangerous. Because we live in a really sex-negative culture. And so the person who's at fault is always, you know, it's always the lower libido person that the higher libido person has to trim themselves down to fit. And you don't want to have sex with somebody who doesn't want to be having sex. That's no fun. You don't want to be serviced that way. And it's one of the things that somebody with a higher libido will sometimes write to me and say, it's really depressing when I have sex with this person and they're just going through the motions to shut me up. And it's not about passion or connection or intimacy or anything. It's just I'm a cow hooked up to a milking machine. That happens to be my wife for half an hour.
So in these situations, is that when people should have a conversation and say, you have permission to do other things? Or
often people will write in their letters that they've had that conversation. That the spouse, and it's not always, you know, it's easy to gender this. It's not always female with low libido, male with high. It's often female with high, male with low. And people will say, you know, we've had fights about this and I've been told by my partner, do what you need to do, just I don't want to hear about it. And they're still afraid to act on that tacit permission. Because if it comes out, they're the bad guy.
Right. And you think they're not necessarily bad
guys. I just don't think marriage can bear the weight that we've placed on its shoulders. We've said that sex is only permissible within the bounds of marriage, that any successful marriage is this like lifelong ecstasy orgasmathon, and that if that's not happening for you, your marriage is fatally flawed. Two people can't be all things sexually to each other always. Over the decades, it's not going to work. I think you want a really strong sexual connection at the start to really cement that bond. To have all those like oxy hormones flooding your brain while you look at that person's face, that's really important. And then you need to chill. You need to relax about it. You need to be, your marriage needs to transcend the importance of sex, which then sometimes turns into there's either permissible sex with others or forgivable sex with others, if it is a betrayal.
Right. And
then these people accuse me of overemphasizing the importance of sex. I look at a marriage and I see a history, these two people together. I see children. I see property. I see two extended families that have knit together. I see a network of friends, neighbors, other relationships, all these people emotionally invested in this partnership. And I look at that and here's a blowjob on a business trip, right? Given or received. So it could have been the woman giving, somebody cheated. And I look at that blowjob and I said, that has to be given less weight than all of this. That blowjob can't be more important than the rest of it. And the people who think that I put too much importance on sex say, oh, no, there was a blowjob on a business trip. You must discard all of this. Divorce and the trauma of it, traumatize your children, rip your lives apart, rip these two extended families apart, force friends and relatives and neighbors to choose sides. All of that must be done because there was a blowjob. And these people tell me I put too much importance on sex when they put so much weight on that one sexual transgression. A blowjob has to be forgivable.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit to another letter. Dear Dan, it's me again.
I love the formality of each letter's rollout.
I don't know if I mentioned that my wife came to California to pursue an acting career. Well, we've been married 7 years now, and she's become quite successful. And to be honest, the fact that she's making so much more money than me is intimidating and frankly a bit emasculating. Have you had many people write to you who have large income disparities that threaten the power balance in their relationship? Has more equality between men and women challenged traditional perceptions of the male breadwinner? Do you have any advice for men making less money than the women they're with? And is that different than if it's the man who's making more? And more broadly, would you say class is an important issue to take into consideration when two people are getting into a committed relationship with each other?
There's all these studies that show that men are less attracted to women who are more powerful, higher levels of education, higher incomes than they are. Women, of course, don't have that problem. And that hasn't budged. I think the studies show that those attitudes really haven't changed at all over the last 30, 40 years, which is a real shame. I don't know how to fix straight guys on that. I really don't. Like, my husband's a stay-at-home husband and has been for 14 years and some months, not that I'm counting. And every dollar I earn is his too, and I don't give a shit. And he certainly doesn't give a shit. And you would think that somebody who is with somebody who is successful financially would just enjoy and bask instead of feel emasculated or castrated or resentful somehow.
And no, and I think marriage is good at kind of codifying at least that idea that it takes a partnership but
you have to pool everything.
But I am curious about going back to what we were talking about historically, like marriage as a kind of bringing together of two families. If it was Stephanie Kuntz talks about the wealth or the rich are consolidating in one way, the poor are also pooling their resources.
But it wasn't
together.
as equals. Like all that consolidation of money and power, it always became the husband's money and the husband's power. The wife came with money, and it became her husband's money that he had absolute and total control over. And so having a wealthy wife or marrying up was a way of enriching yourself for men forever, and that's changed.
And so do you think today people should think about these kind of balances before getting into a relationship, or is that just so unromantic that it's not even worth thinking about? I mean, it's just such an awkward marriage between these different realms, from the sex that we were talking about earlier, religious and financial. It seems like it to be this, because marriage is a contract, right? I mean, one of the lawyers we talked to says, it's the most important contract you're ever going to sign in your life, and people read it over less than they do a cell phone contract. So I'm just wondering, as an advice giver, do you think that people should be discussing very frankly these ideas of money and how it's divided and all of this, and what role does that play in the success of a relationship?
You don't want anything in your relationship. You want to diffuse as many bombs as you can going in. And if you set up a relationship where you're going to maintain separate checking accounts and separate incomes, and you're going to divide household expenses, then that's an engine of bickering and conflict forever. You just want to pool it and pay. Then you don't want to be with someone who has bad judgment, someone who's going to run up credit card debt in your name. You don't want to be with somebody who's a spendthrift and an idiot. So you want to assess somebody economically, really, before you marry them, so that then you can just dump everything into a common pot and not fight about it for the rest of your life. And recognize that I'll make more than you sometimes, you'll make more than me sometimes. Yeah, your wife's an actress and she's making shitloads of money now, and in 20 years.
Exactly.
So if the relationship goes the distance and you're together 30, 40 years, that like I was on top of the world shit doesn't last forever,
Right.
particularly for actresses. In the sexist culture of Hollywood, it does not last forever. And so there's going to be this time where you should be able to celebrate your shared financial success, even if they're generating most of it at this time, with this expectation that the shoe could be on the other foot in 10 years, and you want the same graciousness in response to you being the primary breadwinner that you presented them with when they were.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's an indicator, though, of a more subtle, like, issue of power that exists in any relationship, you know, and that can happen even when money isn't involved. I think sometimes, you know, you tread this line where one person has all the power and then the other one might, and hopefully you kind of live you know, where that's pretty close. Mm-hmm. And if there's ever too much of an imbalance in that, I think that spells the death of a relationship. And I've had that, you know, in other situations, and it was probably
there's not a more financially imbalanced relationship than mine. And it's worked pretty well in some ways.
Because it hasn't turned into a power dynamic, maybe.
Well, there's some power plays.
You think so?
Well, just like when we bought a house, like in the end, Terry said to me, "It's your decision because you're paying for it," and like I got to decide, I got to like rule out some houses because they were too expensive.
Right.
Because that's ultimately my job, is like to generate all the money to pay for fucking everything. When we go on vacation and I'm on my computer and he gets mad, he says, "What are you doing?" I go, "I'm paying for everything, including this fucking vacation." But there's a stabilizing force to, I think, sometimes that economic imbalance. Like there are times in a marriage when you just have to eat it. You have to eat a lot of shit.
Right.
And some, you know, and I think in my marriage there's a beauty imbalance. He's much hotter than I am. And there's an economic imbalance. I make money and he doesn't. And so that can be stabilizing. Like he looks at me and goes, "Well, I'm not going to do better financially." And I look at him and say, "You know, my last boyfriend didn't look like that in a Speedo. I guess we'll stay."
Very good. Okay, let's just. This is a big question.
But we don't have. When we talked about that like chores thing earlier, about we don't have that default to like gendered expectations.
Right.
I don't sit around all day feeling emasculated by the shit that is feminine that I do to keep our house running, and he doesn't sit around feeling emasculated by the shit that's feminine role that he does to keep our houses and lives running smoothly. So that's on the sort of trash heap of non-issues for us as gay men. Like, who gives a fuck? Who makes more money? Who cares?
Yeah. No, you're lucky.
I'm already not a man.
Yeah.
When I looked at my mother and said I put dicks in my mouth, I was like letting go. I emasculated myself. And so everything else that comes at me in my life, I don't assess it on how much does this emasculate me. Culturally, I already emasculated myself, even in my own eyes, but also in the eyes of the culture. I'm not going to worry that my neighbors think I'm less of a man because I don't care.
Right.
If I was worried about that, I wouldn't be openly gay.
Right. Very good. And so this transitions into a very big issue, but maybe we can just touch on it a little bit, which is the politics of sex. And you know, we look to our political leaders for, you know, they often say one thing and do another, and you're very good at calling them out on that.
Screw as I say, not as I screw.
Exactly.
The Republican Party.
And I'm wondering, like, as a broad question, is why are we so interested in the love lives of our leaders, our celebrities? Is it just a kind of voyeuristic thing, or is it a power play? And just why are sex and politics so closely tied together? The other things that make sense in a way that we've talked about. This, in a way, in Europe, they don't think it makes any sense. You know, like they don't really care what their politicians are doing, and
they don't care what Berlusconi was doing.
Okay, there's an extreme example, but I mean, the fact that he was able to do that much shows. But so, what do you think is the relationship between those?
It's like Henry Kissinger said, that power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, and as somebody else said, Hollywood or politics is Hollywood for ugly people. that there's a certain glamour to it, to politics. But I think our interest, other people's interest in other people's sex lives, is perhaps subconsciously a way to humanize these people who become iconic, or these people who seem larger than life, to really bring them down a peg, to remind ourselves that they shit and they fuck and they are humiliated and they are vulnerable at times in the same ways we shit, fuck, are humiliated and are vulnerable at times. I think that's why you saw Clinton's poll numbers rise during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, despite the lies, because it made him human.
Right. So just to finish up on this thought, like, one thing is, Clinton and what you said, people forgave him, and Lydia Lunch, do you know who she is? Mm-mm. She was this kind of punk rock singer in the 80s and 90s, and she's in the film, and she said, I preferred when we had a president who liked getting a blowjob in the White House, because maybe he didn't have to kill as many people. But there's a difference between that and like the Newt Gingrich model, where, you know, he asked for an open marriage. On the one hand, it seems like reasonable and forgivable, but there's something wrong with that picture of somebody who says marriage is tradition, you know, it has to be this way.
It's the hypocrisy of it.
Yeah. And so can you just talk a little bit about the hypocrisy of politicians who try and control our sex lives and tell us what marriage is and isn't?
A lot of particularly Republicans, conservatives, and Christians, they externalize their internal conflicts. They seek to control you as a means to control themselves. I'm going to ban pornography for everybody so that I stop looking at it. I'm going to rail against homosexuality and really box myself in public as anti-gay so that I stop sucking dick myself. That's what you saw out of people like Ted Haggard. Sometimes you see people go out on a limb with their moralism because they're trying to control themselves, and they can't. And so they're externalizing their internal conflict. Michelle Bachmann's husband, Marcus, who sets off everybody's gaydar, looks like the gayest guy on the planet, is an ex-gay counselor. He helps other people not be gay, as I think a way to help himself not be gay. And to be able to tease that out, I mean, it's just so obvious. I think we're reaching a point now where particularly homophobia, when someone's publicly very homophobic, it looks pretty gay when they do that. They look like they're saying, I suck dick, I suck dick. And when someone moralizes publicly, the armor of righteousness is what it's called. Mm-hmm. They moralize publicly to deflect attention away from their own shortcomings and sins. And that's the Republican Party. That's the GOP. That's the marriage of Christian sexual morality and political power in this way that distracts people from, why is the minimum wage so low? People are having sex. Let's talk about that.
So also as part of this process of making this film, we've talked to a lot of these people who are, you know, practicing alternatives like polyamory and swinging, and I don't know if it's because I was in a monogamous marriage for so long, but I never heard of this stuff until recently. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you think there's a shift in the zeitgeist of more openness to alternative arrangements, or is polyamory a new thing? Is it something that's viable? Is it just a fad? Is it? What do you think of this?
I used to joke that I'd been to a couple of polyamorous weddings, but I'd never been to a polyamorous third anniversary party. But now I have. I've been to a couple of polyamorous third anniversary parties. I don't think it's I do think it's a new thing in a way that we're talking about it publicly, which is then attracting more people to consider their possibilities. What I think you're seeing is the aftershocks of gay people coming out. Because now what you're seeing are straight people coming out about their alternative sexualities and alternative relationship models and sexual expression.
And is this progress?
Absolutely, it's progress. If you believe in monogamy, if you think marriage should be monogamous, you want people who are incapable of monogamous behavior to realize that about themselves and sort themselves into their own clumps and groups and communities. You don't want someone who values monogamy, is good at monogamy, to marry somebody who is terrible at it. That's not going to be a marriage that lasts or a marriage that's very happy. So if there's more talk about non-monogamy as a possibility, then people are going to think, I think, more deeply about making a monogamous commitment, whether that's actually what they want or what they should want. You know, we're told, we're sold, really, one relationship model, one idea about who we have to be sexually and in relationships. And then people commit to that before they really know themselves well enough to realize if that is what they actually want.
Right.
And if there's more conversation about polyamory, about being monogamish, about whatever else that gets to people before they make those commitments, when they do make those commitments will be likelier to last because they'll know that this is actually what they want because they've thought of the options and perhaps rejected them. Or they've made a commitment to somebody who wants the same things that they want if they don't want monogamy. The disaster for marriage is not non-monogamy. The disaster for marriage is non-monogamous people marrying monogamous people.
Right. And you think it's, I mean, the polyamorous people claim that it's a sexual identity sometimes as much as being
a relationship
bi
model.
or,
I disagree,
opinion on
and I
that?
get in trouble with them. Sometimes poly people get really pissed off at me. I think if it's something, and maybe I'm a dinosaur now about this, if it's something that gay people, straight people, and bisexual people can do, then it's a behavior or a relationship model or a kink. It's not a sexual orientation or an identity.
But you think some people are built to be more monogamous or less monogamous, or
Some monogamy comes more easily to some people than others. Monogamy makes some people happy. Everybody wants to fuck lots of people. We're wired to want to fuck a lot of people. We are not naturally monogamous. I think we're socially monogamous. I think we do pair bond, but we are not biologically, physically, we're not monogamous. There's clues all over our bodies. Jesse Bering wrote this terrific book called Why Is My Penis Shaped Like That? Other dicks on other mammals, including other apes, and we're just apes, don't have that head that our dick has. Doesn't have the corona, doesn't have the ridge that acts like a plunger in the vaginal canal that sucks semen out. Like that, we evolved to have the penises that we do because we were evolving in a non-monogamous culture, basically, where a woman's body was, your body presumed that she had other men's semen in her, and your body had to act to eliminate that semen so that you had an advantage. So anyway, yeah, we all want to fuck other people. So it's not whether, some people are naturally monogamous and are going to mate with one person for life and be ecstatically happy and never look at anybody else ever again or ever fantasize about anybody else ever again. But some people can be very happy over the decades just having those other people be fantasies. Other people are incapable of having those other people be fantasies. I want those people to be with other people like them.
Right.
I want somebody who doesn't value monogamy or doesn't value it, isn't good at it, doesn't think they want to do it. Monogamous marriage would not make them happy to marry somebody who feels the same way, and I want them to be open with each other about that. So they can have a happy, successful marriage that's not defined by monogamous behavior perfectly executed over 5 decades.
right.
Just in the same way I don't want gay men who are closeted marrying straight women.
Right.
Because that's just going to make everybody unhappy. People who can't be monogamous, don't want to be monogamous, shouldn't make monogamous commitments. And what the culture does is it places tremendous pressure on people to make a monogamous commitment that they can't hold up.
Right.
You shouldn't make a monogamous commitment you can't keep, but the culture isn't absolved of its complicity for forcing people to make monogamous commitments under duress by telling people that monogamy is love, and it isn't.
Yeah, and jealousy is love, and I mean, there's all sorts of twisted interpretations of what proves love or doesn't. And so the next issue is kind of a philosophical one. I studied philosophy at Berkeley, and one of the ideas that stayed with me a lot, and I think applies to all of this, is there's an idea that Kierkegaard had, who wrote a lot about love, and that you can have an unconditional commitment to one thing for your whole life, and that somehow will give more meaning to your life, right? And marriage is a perfect example of that. You commit yourself that despite your whims, despite anything else that happens, there's this thing that's outside of you, it's outside of everyday temporality in other ways, and yet it's finite in the sense that you have to deal with the everydayness of it. So it's this kind of perfect marriage of the infinite and, kind of spiritual side of us and our carnal self.
Uh-huh.
And then there's this kind of Nietzschean idea that, things and experiences and everything are there to be used up, get the most out of them, and then move on to the next thing, right? And I think in marriage and relationships, we have these two models now as a choice in front of us. and you have this DTMFA, dump the motherfucker already, and you have all sorts of examples of when people should just discard the other. And yet you've been in the same relationship for 18 years and have made this commitment for life. And do you think that you're getting someone, are you two built in such a way that you get this lifelong commitment because each of you has the right qualities that, you wouldn't give the advice to dump? You see what I'm saying? Like, you have certain features? Or are you saying, I love you no matter what, and I'm accepting you, and therefore I'm getting certain, richness out of life that the people who go through a relationship and then another one and then another one 5-10 times in their life are missing out on? Yeah.
What was the question?
The question is do you think that the idea of a lifelong monogamous married commitment is something everyone should strive for? Or is it just not for everyone? It's some people get it and some people don't. And you're just lucky or unlucky.
Well, we're not monogamous.
Right. And is that why you've been able to stay together so long?
Yes, absolutely. When non-monogamous behavior destroys a relationship, we all hear about it. He cheated, they had a three-way, and she fell in love with the other guy, whatever. When any sort of non-monogamous behavior leads to, or even is just chronologically associated with the end of a marriage, it gets the blame. When non-monogamy saves a marriage, it never gets the credit.
Right.
And we are still together because we are not monogamous. If we were monogamous, we would have broken up.
Right. But you could also have been not monogamous and still broken up also. I mean,
That's
there's
true.
Something else beyond that.
Yeah, it could be unrelated. Yeah, there's other things we bring to the table than just I can be with him and fuck other people.
Right.
Like I love him.
Right.
To distraction. Like I love him like crazy. That said, we both eat a lot of shit. And I think perhaps that's the secret to our success. Like we were smart enough to recognize that there are unresolvables and there are things that you just pretend aren't there.
Right.
There are things about, I think, my husband that if I were someone else, I call them relationship extinction level events, that we've had things happen in our lives where I could have, maybe should have, maybe if I was somebody else would have dumped him. And vice versa, like things I did that he could have, would have, should have dumped me too. And we didn't. We just sort of always defaulted to this understanding that there's no getting rid of each other.
Right. Well,
so things have to be swallowed, and forgivenesses for your own sake have to be extended to your partner, because otherwise you can't have that partner anymore, and there's all this good stuff your partner brings. And I'm always getting letters from people. This drives me nuts. People, you get a million letters in an advice column, and it's amazing how often the same sentences pop up in a million different letters from a million different couples. But I would take a bullet for him. I would walk through fire for her. I can't forgive. Like, how is forgiving easier than getting shot?
Right.
But that seems to be people's hang-up. Like these hypotheticals that are not going to happen. You're not going to get shot. You're not going to have to walk through fire. I'll do that. But forgive, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to do that all the time, a lot. And things can't be resolved. And I look at my parents' divorce, and I think it was a result of a culture of psychotherapy and counseling and psychoanalysis, because they kept working on their issues until they got to the bottom of them and figured out that they couldn't resolve their issues, so they left each other.
Right.
And Terry and I have issues that we're like, you know what? We're never going to solve these. Let's stop thinking about them.
Right.
And every once in a while they blow up and we get mad at each other, and then we look at each other a day later and we're like, are we good? Yeah, we're good. We're not going to talk about it because it's not fixable.
Yeah. So yeah, because my marriage didn't end for the monogamy reason. Like that wasn't, it was more, I mean, here we come to the part where I get dumped. Dear Dan, it's been,
Think you're right. Speaking about it.
It's been nearly 10 years since I wrote my first letter, and I'm in utter despair. My wife went off to do a film, and when we met again, what can I say? She switched off. I sense she wants to move on, and I'm suddenly realizing how much of my sense of self is tied into my relationship with her. It's more than heartbreak, I feel. It's like a total anxiety attack based on the possibility of having my entire ground pulled out from underneath me. What on earth can I do to hold on? Should I suggest an open relationship, time apart? I mean, given the fact that we were married when she so young, I understand the desire to experience other things and other people. I think I could be open to that, but not sure if she would. I feel there's a more fundamental issue, that she's just bored, and maybe so am I. I've run out of things to say. I feel like she knows what I'm going to say before I say it. One of the things that's made this marriage so amazing, though, has been the union of our families and the sense that there's something larger than us at play. If we do end up getting divorced, is there a way that we can maintain that?
Oh my God. This is one of the problems with marriage as currently practiced is we put it in. Angelina Jolie gave this interview where she said she used to sometimes have lesbian sex or girlfriends or whatever, sometimes do S&M, but now that she's with Brad and they're really in love, she doesn't do that shit anymore. How sad for Brad is that? Like, maybe Brad wants to watch you fuck a girl. Maybe Brad, like, to define the seriousness of love as the end of adventure, possibility, difference, kink, whatever, is to really disincentivize love. If the only way you can have new experiences is to get rid of your old partner, you're going to get rid of your old partner. We are wired for novelty and new experiences and new relationships. And then the culture says, yeah, being together forever is the most important thing in the world. And marriage means all these things that make being together forever almost impossible for most people.
And so you've coined this word monogamish, which I think is interesting on two levels. One is you give it as an advice for, you know, the way people can be. You can be monogamous or monogamish or polyamorous. But it seems like the culture is monogamish, I think. Like that we have this very uneasy relationship with monogamy. On the one hand, it's held up as this ideal that everyone should want. And, you know, if you have it, you're lucky and you're great. And if you don't,
if you're in love, it's easy.
Right.
If you're in love, you don't want to fuck other people. We tell people that and they believe it.
Right.
And then it destroys relationships and marriages because it's really the naive idiots who are harmed most by the monogamy myth of love and marriage, because I'm in love with you and we got married, and being in love means I don't want to fuck other people, and a couple years go by and here's this person I want to fuck. Must mean I don't love you anymore. Because if I still loved you, I wouldn't want to fuck this person, because that's what love is. Instead of telling people love and marriage means if you make a monogamous commitment, you will refrain from fucking other people, but you will still want to fuck other people desperately. It doesn't mean you're not in love with your partner anymore.
Right. And so now finally, dear Dan, it's been 2 years since my divorce. I went through the most difficult 4 months of my life, and when I came out the other end, I felt stronger than ever. Looking back, I feel my marriage had made me complacent, and I felt lost in the world that my wife inhabited. I went through a very fun 6 months of single life, and then, lo and behold, I fell madly in love again. And I feel more myself in my current relationship than I ever have before. But my marriage and divorce shook my faith in the ideal of monogamy in a way that has led me around the world, asking if there's a better way to do these things. What do you think, Dan? After the pain of a divorce, how do we allow ourselves to believe in it again? Or should we? Are we doomed or maybe blessed to just repeat the same cycle over and over again? Or is there something fundamentally wrong with the ideal of monogamous marriage the way it's been sold to us? Should we embrace the possibilities opened up by the decline of monogamy, or should we recommit to the goal of a lifelong monogamous partner? Is it a fear of pain and vulnerability that stops me from wanting to get married again? Or is it necessary and good to be asking these fundamental questions, looking for alternatives and forcing these difficult conversations on our partners? I guess my final question to you is it monogamy that's broken, or is it just me that has to keep healing?
Oh my God, there's so much there.
I know.
Jumping back to monogamish for just a second.
Yeah.
Monogamish, I think, is just a cutesy-poo way of saying socially monogamous but not sexually monogamous, which is what we are, what our species is. We are socially monogamous, pair-bonded, but we are not sexually monogamous, and the DNA tests prove it. And there are lots of other species like that. These birds that everyone used to think were evidence of naturally monogamous species, now we have genetic testing and we know they're all cheating on each other all the time. There's something to be said for the struggle that is to maintain the appearance of social monogamy. Because social monogamy is the appearance of sexual monogamy. People look at you and think they're sexually monogamous, and they might not be. Terry and I think, by some of our neighbors who haven't read anything I've ever written, are perceived to be monogamous. We are socially monogamous. We're not sexually monogamous. And that, having that, that fear of the second marriage, particularly if what tripped you up was, it doesn't sound like what tripped you up in your first marriage was sex necessarily. It was a growing apart. It was, she wasn't who she was. She wasn't a fully grown adult human when she committed to you.
Right.
And then she came into herself as a fully grown adult human, and you guys weren't well suited for each other as adult partners because you married when you were children.
Yeah.
It's like marrying, she was a senior in high school when you got married. Like, who the fuck marries a senior in high school and expects it to be forever? You don't know your hole from an ass in the ground when you're 18 years old. You can't pick a life partner when you're 18 years old.
No, I know. We wouldn't be having this conversation if what anybody would have bet, it would have been over a year later, you know? But all of a sudden, the fact that it lasted almost a decade brought up these questions that now as adult people, we grew apart.
How much of it was inertia, the staying together? How long was it joyful?
No, it was joyful for many years, yeah. And I am kind of like, by nature, a nester, someone who's believes in commitment.
Do you still have a relationship with her now?
Yeah, we're friends, but we've gone our separate ways, you know? She's engaged and pregnant, and it was the best thing that could have happened, for sure. I mean, we got lucky. I agree with what you said earlier.
Yeah, 10 good years
It wasn't
together.
a failed marriage. The question, it's led me on this journey that I think that
Life is long, and what you want changes.
And
is there
these-
a way
but
to,
these
is there a way
questions
to
are-
have, is there a way to have change in the long life of a committed relationship and keep each other?
that's the big question.
That's what you have to harness. It's not really about sex. It's not really about anything else. If you're with somebody for a very long time, you're going to evolve and change. And you should evolve and change. And can you celebrate that in each other? Can that be something that makes you stronger over time? You know, you said that you two grew bored with each other. And was that because you knew each other too well? Was that because you spent too much time together? There's studies that show that one of the predictors of a successful long-term relationship is that they have time apart.
Yeah, no, I think that, again, that's one of the reasons it did so well. I mean, we did have that, you know, she was off doing films and I was doing my things. And I think that 10 years in Hollywood should count as 50 years in the rest of the world. You know, I mean, again, I agree with what you said early on, which is a marriage that ends shouldn't be considered a failure. But I do think that there's a tension that I found in myself and in the culture at large between as the serial monogamy type of what I think of as a...
What does serial monogamy get you, though?
I think nothing. That's the problem. I think it gets you some things. It gets you truly new experiences.
Right.
I mean, and new lives. When you're with somebody new, it is new. But maybe it's 10% new, and the rest you're still kind of dealing with yourself.
What the polyamorous get is that newness without having to discard the life partner.
So are you an advocate of polyamory?
No, I'm not an advocate of polyamory necessarily, but one of the things that drives me crazy, like, I've been with Terry for almost 20 years. And we've been together through thick and thin, and we've raised a kid together, and like there's been shitstorms and good times and terrible times. But because we're publicly not monogamous, I get letters every fucking day from people saying, you don't really love each other, you're not really committed. Because if you're really committed and really in love, you wouldn't have sex with other people, and neither would he. And often in these letters, or I will email these people back and get into an argument with them because I'm cantankerous, they will say, every relationship I've ever been in has been monogamous. And I will write them back and say, how many relationships are you talking about? And they will say, oh, you know, I'm 35 and I've had 5 committed monogamous relationships that you've ended, 4 of, for newness, for novelty, for a new experience, for that new relationship energy, as the polyamorous call it, for new love. You've had to discard these people one at a time. I have never discarded Terry. He's never discarded me. And we are less committed than you with the 5 exes with whom you were serially monogamous.
So you're pro-commitment.
I am pro-commitment.
And all of the other benefits that come from what otherwise people think is only possible in a monogamous relationship.
Sexual exclusivity is the enemy of commitment. It is the enemy of longevity in a relationship. Because if you define an infidelity as a relationship extinction level event, your relationship is going to end. Because there will be cheating. There will be something like some of the studies, 60% of men, 40% of women cheat. And the numbers are getting high. When you factor out age and you look at women under 40, the numbers are the same. Like women who are older are less likely to have cheated on their spouses, but women who are 30-ish are as likely as their male partners who have cheated. All of these people who are cheating are not married to each other. So infidelity is going to touch every relationship. If you define an infidelity as it's over, you've written your marriage's death warrant. You signed your marriage's death warrant the day you signed your marriage license, and that's just crazy. And we have to de-emphasize the importance of sex in long-term relationships to preserve long-term relationships, long-term loving, decent, solid relationships. Remember the shit Hillary
Do you have
got?
to shut off, like, when you're getting these other thrills, do you have to compartmentalize them as just thrills? Or are you also allowing yourself to have, like, an emotional connection with somebody else? And isn't that actually threatening ever to your...
That's potentially
first-
threatening. Yeah.
But it's just...
So
you
people
just
will say
take
to
that
people who
risk.
are non-monogamous, like, listen to me, don't you get jealous? And I look at them and say, don't you?
Right.
Like, does jealousy not touch monogamous couples? Every non-monogamous couple I know has broken up. Like, every monogamous couple you know has never broken up. There's no such thing as a monogamous couple that fell apart. Falling apart is something that only happens to us non-monogamous folks? I don't think so. Monogamy is not the secret to success. Non-monogamy isn't the secret to success either. All non-monogamy does is it diffuses a time bomb that ticks at the heart of every monogamous relationship. I can't remember the name of this researcher in London who wrote that every monogamous relationship is a disaster waiting to happen when one or the other cheats. In my relationship, that's not a disaster that can happen to us.
Right. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.